Okay, today we will take a look at a problem called feudalism, which was a social and economic system that developed during the Western Middle Ages. Now, where is the Middle Ages in respect to the other major periods of Western history? We have the ancient world, the Middle Ages, and the modern period, and most scholars situate the Middle Ages between around 600 to 1300. There is some disagreement, but overall that's the acceptable range of time. If we take a look at Europe today, we can see that the map is divided into a large number of political states of different nations. This is a modern map, but if we go back to the ancient world and to the Middle Ages, we find a very different picture. Part of the problem of feudalism is the question of how this picture develops. Why do these different places change over time? If we start with the Roman Empire, we can see that the Romans had a very large and very centralized state. They controlled a very wide expanse of what today is Europe, North Africa, and Western Asia. Roman centralization held control over this huge amount of land, and the empire was not only centralized in Rome, but the political policies were uniform throughout the major cities of the empire. In the year 395, it became clear that the Roman Empire was simply too large to manage from one place, and so it was divided into two major sections, the Western Empire and the Eastern Empire. We'll be focused on the Western Empire, which of course covers most of modern-day Europe. The Western Roman Empire entered a period of decline. This decline happened for a number of reasons, some of which were external and some of which were internal. The external reasons were mostly from invasions or migrations from outside, mostly from the north and from the east, but also some factors like a changing climate, which changed the amount of food that could be effectively grown. Other problems were internal and were related to labor, to the decline in the labor supply, which then in turn led to a decline in surpluses. A surplus simply means to have more than you need to support yourself. And of course, the large cities of the Roman Empire relied upon these surpluses to maintain themselves. This led to major economic disruptions, and so altogether these affected the fate of the Western Roman Empire. We can see in this slide invasions from different places, from 100 to 500, but also later in the 8th century, invasions from Islamic expansion from the east and from the south. These outside pressures, I should add, were often slow and unsystematic. They did not happen all at one time, but collectively over time, they had a very serious impact on the Roman state. What were some of these significant changes? These are in fact important for the growth of feudalism. In the Roman Empire, the major cities declined and in some cases disappeared. The taxation could no longer be collected, and therefore services and patronage from rich people disappeared. Patronage here refers to the support for the arts. Large-scale, long-distance trade and shipping, so both over land and over water, became very limited, and coined money disappeared, leading to a new economy based upon services and barter. So overall, what we find is a movement from a centralized empire among the Romans to a very decentralized collection of much smaller states during the Middle Ages. So these political disruptions led to territories broken into smaller and smaller pieces until we reach a sort of high point around 1300, when Europe is filled with very small political units. The social and economic relationships that resulted from this growth or from this change is generally called feudalism. In the 8th century, we see some fairly large kingdoms still, but the disintegration will continue over several hundred years. Why? Why would this happen? So here we have a picture in the 8th century. We can see there are still some fairly large states or political units in Europe, but this is going to change. The process of feudalization, by which feudalism came about, had to do with the weakness of rulers who could not pay large armies and therefore could not protect the integrity of their land. In order to solve this problem, land was granted by stronger figures, stronger lords, to weaker lords, who could then use that land as a source of wealth. They could use the labor of the people living on that land to support themselves. These grants were not actually gifts, and they often would return to the lord upon the death of the vassal, of the weaker lord. In any case, this relationship created a new set of relations between men, between powerful people. This is characterized as the lord and vassal relationship. The lord grants the land to the vassal profits from that land, but the vassal owes the lord something, very often military service. So if I'm the lord and you're my vassal and I need your help, you are responsible, you are required to give me assistance. Chains of relationships could develop from this if a weaker lord would give land to an even weaker person. As you might guess, this is a fairly unstable system over time. But it led to an idealized chain of relations with the king at the top and then the peasants and the serfs at the bottom. We can see this in some diagrams where the king, the nobility, but we should also add members of the church, were at the top of society, the privileged groups, and the great mass of people, the peasants and sometimes serfs, the workers, were the bottom of the pyramid. Over time, these communities became quite self-sufficient, so that in what's called a demesne, all the necessities of life were produced in isolation from other groups. The class structure then was quite unbalanced and also fairly rigid. Only about 4% of the population included the nobility and the clergy. The peasantry, the laborers, the workers, made up the bottom 96% of society. The uses of resources were clearly aimed at the benefit of the top 4%. We can see that by looking at the buildings that have survived, enormous military fortifications or castles. Also, if we look at where the peasants lived, those places have not survived, as you can see in this peasant hut. But also the church built lasting monuments and decorated those monuments. And the monks, the monastic life, was also benefited from this as well. But we can see that the wealth was certainly not evenly distributed between groups. The height of feudalism, around 1300, is illustrated in this map, where Europe is broken into a very large number of small places. This is going to change, though, and after the 13th and 14th century, we begin to see recovery in which a small merchant class develops and wealth begins to be concentrated into this group. This is the origin of the nation state. Thanks a lot.